Bonjour, chers collègues.
Good day, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the press room. We've spent quite a bit of time here today. We are joined by Michel Barnier, our chief negotiator on Brexit, and Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, Dominic Raab. And following the latest round of negotiations with the United Kingdom.
First time here in the European Commission. Et je donne la parole tout de suite.
Let me give the floor straight away to Mr. Barnier.
Good afternoon or good evening to all of you, and nice to see you here in the Schumann room for a change. Dominic and I just had a second constructive meeting. I agree with what Dominic said last week. We must bring new energy into these negotiations. And we will need to sustain this energy over the coming weeks in order to reach an agreement. We both want to conclude in October with a deal. So we have two main challenges. First, we need to finalize the outstanding issues of the withdrawal agreement, including a legally operative backstop for Ireland and Northern Ireland. Second, we need to agree on a political declaration on our future relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, let me focus first on the future relationship. Last Friday, I made some initial comments on the UK's white paper. This week confirmed that the UK proposals on security mark a real step forward. The UK has provided new guarantees on the protection of fundamental rights and the uniform application of law. The White Paper commits the UK to membership of the European Convention on Human Rights. It recognises the European Court of Justice as the only arbiter of EU law. These are important safeguards. They enlarge the possibilities of what we can do together on internal security, in particular on data exchange. Based on the protection of personal data and based on reciprocity, the EU and the UK can explore the modalities for a close cooperation on the following points. One, the exchange of DNA, fingerprints, and vehicle registration information, so-called PRUM. Two, the exchange of passenger name records to better track and identify individuals involved in terrorism and crime. Three, swift and effective extradition based on the procedural rights for suspects. Furthermore, I am particularly pleased with the progress in our talks on foreign policy and external security. We have a shared understanding on how to organize our future close cooperation, including on sanctions, defense capabilities, and crisis management. The UK is a member of the UN Security Council and an important player in security and defense. Our cooperation is even more important in today's geopolitical context. And I recall that this cooperation EU-UK in defense will be in addition to what we do already together in NATO and in addition to bilateral agreements between the UK and certain member states. Ladies and gentlemen, in contrast, on our future economic relationship, it comes at no surprise that finding common ground between the EU 27 and the UK is more difficult. But we have agreed already on a common denominator. We both want an ambitious free trade agreement. In March, the EU leaders proposed an unprecedented free trade agreement to the UK. Another area of convergence between the EU and the UK is the need for ambitious customs arrangements. We are also both committed to a level playing field between our economies. But, to be frank, we are not at the end of the road yet. There are major issues to be discussed and questions to be answered. We share a clear understanding and a core principle that will define our future economic relationship. The UK and the EU will both preserve the autonomy of their decision-making. Both will preserve their regulatory autonomy. The UK wants to take back control, Dominic, of its money, law and borders. And you said exactly this point in an article this morning. We will respect that. But the EU also wants to keep controls of its money, law and borders. And the UK should respect that. So we share an objective in that regard. A clear example of what this means concerns our future relationship in financial services. We discussed financial services this week and agreed that future market access will be governed by autonomous decisions on both sides. We recognized the need for this autonomy, not only at the time of granting equivalence decisions, but also at the time of withdrawing such decisions. And we agreed to have close regulatory cooperation. And this will also have to respect the autonomy of both parties. Maintaining control of our money, law and borders also applies to the EU's custom policy. The EU cannot, and the EU will not, delegate the application of its customs policy and rules, VAT and excise duty collection to a non-member who would not be subject to the EU's governance structures. Any customs arrangements or customs union, and I always said that the EU is open to a customs union, must respect this principle. And in any case, a customs union which would help to reduce friction at the border would come with our common commercial policy for goods. President Juncker's visit to Washington yesterday shows the importance of our common commercial policy. It shows that we are stronger together. Any customs arrangement will so have to be workable and must protect EU and national revenue without imposing additional costs on businesses and customs authorities. This is, ladies and gentlemen, the framework within which we will work with the UK over the coming weeks. And this week, these customs discussions have also been the backdrop to the backstop. We have clear agreement between the EU and the UK that the withdrawal agreement must contain an all-weather insurance policy. We share the goal of avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland. And let me recall why. Because, as we agreed in December, the absence of a hard border has to be guaranteed, no matter what the future relationship will be. Of course, we have always said that a better solution in the future EU-UK relationship could replace the backstop. This explains the unless and until provision of the backstop to which the UK has agreed. Continued uncertainty on this issue after the UK's withdrawal would be unacceptable for Ireland, for Northern Ireland, for the UK as a whole, and obviously for the 27. Ladies and gentlemen, we also agreed in March on the scope of the issues to be solved in the backstop. This week, we focused on the customs element of the backstop. The UK wants this to be UK-wide. As I said last week, we have no objection in principle to this. But we have doubts that it can be done without putting at risk the integrity of our customs union, our common commercial policy, our regulatory policy, and our fiscal revenue. We have had an open and frank and therefore useful discussion with Dominic and his team on these issues. I think that the UK has understood our concerns and respects our principles. And the UK has promised to come back to us with concrete proposals on how to address our concerns. Both teams will reflect on this in the coming weeks. The next time we meet will be mid-August. We must advance and agree on the legally operative backstop to conclude the withdrawal agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, before giving the floor to Dominic and taking questions, let me just add one more point. I've been focusing on all the open issues and the work that we have had ahead of us in the next few weeks to conclude this withdrawal agreement. Let's keep in mind that we have already agreed on a large part of this withdrawal agreement, very large part, more or less 80%. This includes the very important issue of citizen rights, which has been our priority since the beginning of these negotiations, as it is the priority of the European Parliament, and it continues to be our priority. But the job does not stop here. We will also have to work on making sure that citizens on both sides can easily avail themselves of the rights that will be guaranteed in the withdrawal agreement. And we are working with the Home Office, and we are also working with the Member States on this point. Thank you very much for your attention, and now, Dominic, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Michel, for hosting us again. It's good to be back in Brussels for a second time this month. This meeting comes at a crucial moment in our negotiations. A lot has been achieved to date, thanks to the hard work of teams on both sides. We have reached agreement, as Michel says, on the rights of the 4 million citizens who have chosen to make their home in either the UK or the EU. We've provided certainty for businesses through an implementation period that gives both sides the time they need to prepare for our new relationship. We've reached agreement on the financial settlement, and we're stepping up our efforts on our joint commitment, as Michel again says, to respect the Belfast Agreement in all its parts, safeguarding the historic progress it has fostered over the past 2 decades in Northern Ireland. Our job now, one that Michel and I share together, is to do 3 things. First, we must complete the withdrawal agreement, concluding those remaining issues. Discussions this week have moved us closer again to an agreement on the last few remaining areas, including governance, data protection, and administrative procedures. Second, we need to complete the protocol on Northern Ireland and Ireland. We must meet our joint commitments through the overall future relationship between the UK and the EU, which will provide a substantive, lasting solution. But, in keeping with our commitments to include legal text detailing the backstop solution in the withdrawal agreement, we advanced in June a detailed proposal for the customs element of the backstop. We believe this proposal represents a practical way forward, and it's an answer that respects the integrity of the EU and the constitutional and economic integrity of the United Kingdom. Our teams have been discussing this issue in detail and at length, and whilst, of course, more work needs to be done, our teams are approaching this issue in the right spirit. With pragmatism on both sides, I'm confident we can find a way to resolve it into a workable solution. And that will be easier to achieve if it is clear that the backstop, if it were to be exercised at all, could only be for a time-limited period before the permanent future arrangements would become operational and would not give rise to an extended limbo. Last but by no means least, we need to work up a clear and precise vision of our future relationship and set this out in a political declaration to be signed alongside the withdrawal agreement. And on the basis that there is no deal until we have the whole deal, there will need to be a clear timeframe and obligation written into the withdrawal agreement to move expeditiously from this declaration to the conclusion of the binding agreements that will give it effect during the course of the implementation period. Today, Michel and I have discussed some of the key proposals set out in the UK's White Paper on the future relationship. Our approach is designed to strike a new and fair balance of rights and obligations for the UK and the EU, one which respects the EU's autonomy just as it does the UK's sovereignty. And the contours of our proposal are now well known, but allow me just to recap. On the economic side, a free trade area for goods that avoids either party imposing additional checks at the border, protecting integrated supply chains and the jobs and livelihoods dependent on them, and meeting our commitments to Northern Ireland and Ireland. This free trade area would be underpinned by a common rulebook and a new facilitated customs arrangement with an institutional framework that I'll return to shortly. And alongside this free trade area for goods, there would be new arrangements for services. While recognising our access will be different in future, we want to minimise barriers to trade between the United Kingdom and the EU with specific arrangements for financial services tailored to our close and interdependent relationship in this particular sector. We've proposed robust commitments to ensure trade is open and fair, and while I understand the EU's underlying concern, the commitment to open and fair trade must of course be met on both sides. We also want to see cooperation on energy and transport, and we propose a framework for mobility that enables UK and EU citizens to continue to travel to each other's countries, businesses and professionals to provide services, and our young people to enjoy the educational opportunities and the rich tapestry of cultural life right across Europe. On the security side, our proposal is for arrangements that maintain existing operational capabilities that the UK and the EU deploy to protect our citizens. And it's already clear from the discussions we've had this week, which have been constructive, that the White Paper has brought a new dynamic to this particular part of our wider conversation. Next, we want to see continued coordination on foreign policy, defence and development issues, acting together to tackle some of the most pressing global challenges where it is always more effective to work side by side. Beyond trade and security, we propose a new arrangement to ensure the continued free flow of data, cooperative accords to strengthen joint work from science and innovation to international development, and a new approach to our annual negotiations on access to waters and the sharing of fisheries opportunities. Underpinning all of this, we propose a joint institutional framework that respects our democratic prerogatives on both sides, ensures clear and consistent interpretation, including of common rules, provides a clear and balanced approach to ending disputes through arbitration, and ultimately allows for the depoliticisation of our future relationship, which will need to be nurtured and reinforced over time. Finally, I appreciate the questions that were posed by the Commission, and Michel's mentioned them, on the temporary customs arrangement. We have addressed each one in detail. We will continue to address any outstanding concerns. And we've published, of course, 2 white papers now detailing comprehensively how we will incorporate in law the majority of the withdrawal agreement that has been agreed to date, and setting out our proposals, as I've already outlined, on the future relationship. We have designed our proposals both to respect the result of the referendum and the core principles of the EU. We've considered the innovative approaches the EU has taken in the past with other third countries when the political will's been there. In sum, the UK has set out our plans in detail. Those plans are ambitious, principled and pragmatic, and I'm committed to injecting new energy into these talks along with Michel. We've agreed to meet again in mid-August and then to continue weekly discussions to clear away all the obstacles that lie on our path to a strong deal in October and one that works for both sides. Michel, we've got work to do. Thank you.
We have now time for a limited number of questions due to the late hour already. So let's start with James.
Thank you, Alexander. It's James Crisp from the Daily Telegraph. I'm over here, Secretary of State. Wrong, over the other side, yeah. Secretary of State, you've said in the past that the payment of the Brexit bill should be conditional on a future trade deal. This isn't what was agreed under your predecessor. Do you stand by that? And Mr. Barnier, I'd be interested in your views on Mr. Raab's previous comments regarding the bill. But you've also said that that the EU will adapt if the UK changes its red lines or evolves its position. Do you think the White Paper has evolved the position sufficiently? And if so, when will you adapt in turn?
So, firstly, on the question you directed at me, we've been clear, as indeed the EU has all along, that there is no deal until we do the whole deal. The various different aspects, the withdrawal agreement, the protocol and the political declaration come as a package as a whole. And we had a good constructive conversation today about, in practice, how we make sure there is that link between those two key areas, the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration on the future framework.
If Dominic will allow me, it is indeed quite right that there is an agreement on nothing until we have agreement on everything. But what is perfectly clear to the 27 EU member states and to the European Parliament is that what was agreed in December and in March has been agreed for good. Now, of course, in terms of legal certainty, that will come with the ratification of the final treaty towards which we're working. We have to avoid any possible misunderstanding. So I'm glad you put this very question. The United Kingdom has decided, as is its sovereign right, to leave the European Union. Theresa May, like Dominic, have confirmed that when they leave the EU, they want to leave the single market as well. They know the rules of the single market perfectly. They know the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms that are fundamental to the single market, and they want to leave the customs union as well. And of course, they know too the key condition to that, which is being part and parcel of a strong trade policy, common trade policy. Now, these are the red lines that have been laid down, and I haven't heard any mention that they have changed in the meantime. Now, of course, one might want to have a customs arrangement. We're working on that and towards that, to giving a joint content to these words. A customs union, well, or is it something else? We're willing to work towards that. But the United Kingdom knows how we function and how we do our work. So, in terms of our approach, it's not ideological, it's not dogmatic. We're talking about the economy. Since the Single European Act, which was put in place with the United Kingdom since 1993, with the removal of internal borders within the single market, we have created an ecosystem of law, of rules, of regulations, common certification for products, and a common body of rules and regulations. And first and foremost, a single legal jurisdiction. That is what the United Kingdom is leaving, but we will continue within this and continue working to improve and strengthen this ecosystem. We don't want to undermine it or destabilize it. That's not something which is negotiable for the European Union. I say this based on the guidelines of the EU 27, the unanimous guidelines laid down by the heads of state and government in March. There's no possible way for us to allow this ecosystem, the single market, which embodies the single market, to allow this to be undermined in any way, or destabilized because the United Kingdom is leaving. Now, in the medium to long term, I would say that for the United Kingdom, it would not be in your interest either to have a destabilized single market. So that is the key point, which we have to bear in mind at all times. We have a lot of other issues which we're working on a very constructive spirit. We all, of course, on both sides, we want to respect the fundamental principles. And I've reminded us of one in particular, and that is that we need to respect each other's decision-making autonomy.
And then, is there somebody behind the cameras whom I cannot see? No. All right, Paddy.
Paddy Smith, Irish Times. Mr. Raab, I wanted to come to you about the thorny issue of the backstop. We've seen in the last couple of weeks the Commission very seriously trying to, what Mr. Barnier has called, de-dramatise the idea of technical checks and customs controls on the Irish Sea. And he makes the point, or he's made the point, that these checks already exist in relation to agricultural produce and laws. How do you justify insisting that such measures actually have constitutional implications when you already have such measures in place? And why could you not see some move along those lines towards recognising the possibility of creating a separate Northern Ireland customs area?
We are committed to, for the exceptional circumstances that I mentioned earlier, making sure we translate the commitment in the joint report into a protocol on the backstop. But as we've said consistently, and the position hasn't changed, we will not do anything that will threaten the economical or constitutional integrity of the UK. And we will keep working on all those technical issues, looking at the proposals on all sides, asking questions ourselves, indeed, of the EU's position. But we're confident that actually, with a bit of imagination and with the goodwill and the spirit of the negotiations that we've had so far, we will be able to get a workable solution. And it needs to be workable.
Well, as Dominic said, I just have to reiterate what our thinking is. At no time whatsoever did we want to create a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Not at all. We have to resolve a problem. We have to find a solution. It's a real problem that's been created by Brexit. It's Brexit that's created this problem between Ireland and Northern Ireland, which does risk the Good Friday Agreement. So we've got to find a solution to the Good Friday Agreement. We need some practical solutions, and that's why we had proposed this backstop. But we need a backstop. Whether it's our backstop, well, we can discuss that. But we need a backstop that is made up of measures that are legally valid at the time when the agreement is signed, which is why I had asked that we should de-dramatize this whole issue. I mean, of course, we have technical controls, operational controls. Some of them are already implemented in Northern Ireland for products that come in from the remainder of the UK into Belfast. So they already exist. So we've got to go through this, a list of control by control, to see what has to be done. And we've got to find a UK-wide solution to customs controls. So that's the basis for our work, and we hope that in the weeks to come we will be able to look at things in terms of an operational and practical approach, not an ideological one.
Mr. Barnier, I really do have to press you on this, I'm afraid. The Chequers White Paper led to 2 resignations from the government's cabinet because of the evolution that it represented in terms of the government's position and British politics. Your negotiating mandate, and I think it was repeated again in Council conclusions, makes it clear that if the British government's position evolves, the EU will reconsider its offer too. Do you consider the Chequers White Paper an evolution and not? And if it's not an evolution, then clearly for you it is unworkable and not a basis for further talks. So you can be absolutely clear on that, please. And Mr. Raab, the Chequers White Paper was a political gambit that propelled you to high office. It seems pretty clear from what Mr. Barnier is telling us that that political gambit has failed. Where does that now leave the British strategy, just months away from the deadline of negotiating this withdrawal agreement?
Je ne me permettrai pas de faire des commentaires sur les...
I'm not going to comment on the domestic political debate in the United Kingdom. I respect this debate, this ongoing debate, and I don't want to intervene in it in any way or to make any comments on who is in the government or isn't in the government or on domestic political issues. We negotiate with Theresa May, with Dominic Raab, and with their team. And I must say, on both sides, the teams, I must say a word of thanks to them because they're extremely competent and professional on a very serious issue, namely organising the United Kingdom's orderly withdrawal from the European Union and preparing the ground for a future partnership between the EU and the UK. For months now, in the press room, I've been saying that the United Kingdom should tell us exactly what it wants. Now, I'm not going to contradict myself now. We welcome the discussion in Chequers and the document which came out of that. We studied it carefully. I have, once again, speaking here, set out some of the positive points. And I think this document can be useful in making progress. And on the basis of these positive points in the economic field, for example, where the white paper sets out a proposal in favor of an ambitious free trade agreement, that's what we're proposing too. And from the outset, in particular in the European Council guidelines, so it calls for custom arrangements. I've said that we need to agree on the precise content. There are a lot of other points of cooperation where we can find some common ground, I believe, in terms of creating a sound foundation for our future relationship. And there are other points at the same time. Again, I don't want to intervene in the internal political debate, but there are other points on which we have a problem because they contradict they clash with the European Council guidelines. So they contradict my clear negotiating guidelines. Indivisibility of the 4 freedoms, the integrity of the single market, these are the key points. This is our main asset, and we're not going to negotiate on that, on the indivisibility. The United Kingdom has known that from the outset. There are other issues too on feasibility of the proposed customs arrangements and dual taxation. Well, there's no reason why EU businesses should have to bear the administrative or financial cost of the UK's decision to leave the European Union. So what I'm trying to set out here in terms of giving you the background to the European Council guidelines, the United Kingdom has decided to leave the European Union. It's that way around, not the other way around. And we propose to maintain our strength, our asset, our main asset, which is the European single market in all its dimensions.
Well, You referred to the Chequers principles as a gambit. In fact, they are now fleshed out into a white paper with a detailed set of serious, credible, workable proposals, but of course the subject of negotiation. We've had a good discussion this week at technical level. Michel and I have had a good meeting today. 80% of the withdrawal agreement, more or less, has been agreed, as Michel has said. We've got further issues and questions to resolve on the backstop, that's clear, but we've also got the resolve to address those issues and come to the right conclusion in time. And we've got a good template for the future relationship in the shape of the white paper. And Michel talked about the UK and the EU having strong cooperation, respecting the autonomy of each side. And I think that's an important principle. And with ambition and pragmatism and energy on all sides, we can get there in October.
Last question goes to Adam.
Hi. Would either of you welcome the intervention of heads of state and government, perhaps to update the guidelines or give this whole process a bit of a push? And actually, at what point, with respect to both of you, do you just go, actually, we can't do this, it needs to be the leaders that do it?
Well, probably Dominic needs his leader to push ahead. I also, on a constant basis, want my leaders. I'm in the negotiator of the EU. I'm working, and I work on the basis of the trust put in me by President Juncker, as well as the other institutions. We need the expertise. The UK wants to leave, it wants to be associated, but I'm working on the basis of the mandate handed down to me by the European Council. I mean, I don't need to say this to you, but I constantly need the backing of the institutions. Every 3 months, I work with the heads of government and state, the foreign ministers, as I did last Friday. I report to them, I take stock of the situation, I analyze the white paper, and everyone spoke on the basis of what the different governments of the member states say. So I work on their behalf. So anyone who wants to find a slither of a difference between my mandate and what the heads of government and state want, well, they're wasting their time, actually.
I think from the UK's perspective, obviously, we're conscious of the pressures on all sides in relation to this negotiation, but the reality is we've got some core principles we do agree on and a large amount of the technical detail which we've concluded. It's the job of Michel and myself to focus on coming up with the technical resolution of some of those issues that can be resolved that way, to make the compromises with the necessary flexibility and pragmatism, and I feel through the proposals we've set out and the movement we've made to date have shown our willingness. And I think if we continue with that vein, solving problems, resolving outstanding issues with energy, with enthusiasm, with goodwill on all sides, we'll get there.
Okay, Jennifer, you had you on the list. It's really the last one.
Thank you. So a question from the Guardian to Mr. Raab. You talked about all the areas of progress and the deals you want to strike with the EU, but can the rest of your party accept what appears to many of them to be Brexit in name only? Do you think you will carry them with you? And turning to the other wing of your party, there have also been calls for a second referendum. Nothing that's being negotiated now was on the ballot paper. So should this be put again to the British people for a second referendum?
Well, on the second referendum, clearly not. We've always said we need to respect the democratic verdict. All parties in the House of Commons at the time of the legislation accepted that we need to respect the outcome. In terms of course, there are different views on the EU side, on the UK side. It's the job of Michel and I to forge a principled, pragmatic approach which, and from the UK side, gives effect to the referendum, but also strikes the kind of cooperation from trade to security in the other areas that, as Michel has rightly said, I could have said it myself, respects the autonomy of both sides, but seeks to strive and forge strong areas of cooperation in all of those areas where we've got strong mutual interests.